Picture this. It is the early hours of the morning. Across 15 Ukrainian regions, air raid sirens cut through the darkness simultaneously. Entire cities plunge underground, into metro stations, basements, parking garages, and above them, hundreds of projectiles carve through the night sky. Cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, Iranian-designed Shahed drones by the dozens. The largest aerial assault Russia had launched in months was underway, and its target was devastatingly clear: Ukraine's energy grid, the lights, the heat, the will to keep fighting. But here is what Putin did not expect that night. Something new was waiting in the dark, something fast, something the Kremlin had warned for over a year would never be allowed to fly over Ukrainian skies. The F-16 had arrived, and it was hunting. Welcome back to Laura Collins, where we go beyond the headlines and dig into the stories that are actually reshaping our world. I am Laura Collins, and today we are diving deep into one of the most consequential military decisions of this entire war: the arrival of the F-16 fighter jet in Ukraine, what it has done on the battlefield, what it has cost, and what it means for the future of this conflict and beyond. What you are about to hear is not just the story of a fighter jet. It is the story of how a country under siege rewrote the rules of modern air warfare, humiliated one of the largest military forces on Earth, and forced the most powerful alliance in history to go further than it ever planned. This one is going to be detailed, so stay with me all the way through, because the final chapter of this story might be the most important one of all. And before we get into it, if you are watching this channel for the first time, please hit that subscribe button right now. Not because I ask in every video, but because this is exactly the kind of deep strategic analysis you are not going to find anywhere else. Drop a comment below too. Tell me, do you think the F-16 has changed the outcome of this war? I read every single one. Now let us get into it. To truly understand why the arrival of the F-16 matters so much, you have to go back to the beginning. Because before we talk about what these jets are doing now, we need to talk about the catastrophic aerial situation Ukraine was in before they ever touched down. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion in February 2022, Ukraine's Air Force was, in plain terms, a relic of the Soviet era. The backbone of its fleet consisted of MiG-29s, aircraft designed and built in a different century for a different kind of war. These were not cutting-edge machines adapted for modern combat. They were aging platforms carrying aging weapons against one of the most sophisticated air forces on the planet. The early days of the invasion were brutal for Ukrainian aviation. According to Russian military sources, over 90 Ukrainian aircraft were destroyed in the opening phase of the invasion alone. Ukraine's own figures were more conservative, but even by Kiev's count, just a few months into the conflict, the Air Force acknowledged it had fewer than 60 operational fighter jets remaining. 60, against the full weight of Russia's aerial armada. You may remember the legend of the Ghost of Kiev, the mysterious Ukrainian pilot supposedly shooting down multiple Russian jets in those chaotic opening days. It captured the world's imagination. It became a symbol of Ukrainian defiance. But it was a myth. A necessary one, perhaps, for morale, but a myth nonetheless. The uncomfortable truth was starker. Ukraine had effectively lost air superiority on day one of the invasion. Not partially, not in certain regions, comprehensively, and the country would pay an enormous price for that loss throughout the first 2 years of fighting. Cities would burn, infrastructure would collapse, and pilots would be asked to fly missions that by any rational military calculation should not have been survivable. That is the starting point. That is the hole Ukraine was trying to climb out of. And understanding the depth of that hole is the only way to appreciate just how extraordinary everything that came after truly was. Here is something that does not get said enough. Even in that desperate position, outnumbered, outgunned, flying aircraft that were decades behind their opponents, Ukraine did not collapse. It adapted. And the way it adapted is one of the most remarkable stories in modern military history. Unable to win in the skies, Ukraine turned the ground into a weapon. Its surface-to-air missile systems, a patchwork of Soviet-era technology that was progressively supplemented by Western Patriot and Hawk systems, turned Ukrainian airspace into a killing field for Russian aircraft. According to Ukraine's Air Force Command, Kiev had downed nearly 700 Russian planes and helicopters over the course of the conflict. 700. That number represents a staggering attrition of Russian aviation assets, achieved largely from the ground up. But ground-based defenses have hard limits, and Russia had learned to work around them. Russian aircraft began launching glide bombs, guided munitions dropped from jet bombers cruising safely beyond the reach of Ukraine's air defenses. These were not improvised weapons. They were precision instruments of destruction, and Russia used them on an industrial scale. In March 2024 alone, Russia launched 3,000 of these weapons, 3,000 in a single month. The destruction they caused was not just tactical, it was strategic. According to analysis by the Royal United Services Institute, Russian strikes had cumulatively destroyed 9 gigawatts of Ukraine's domestic power generation capacity by mid-2024. Ukraine's total peak winter demand is 18 gigawatts. Do the math. Half of the country's ability to keep its people warm through winter had been methodically erased from the sky. Ukraine desperately needed a way to push those Russian bombers back. Ground-based missiles could not reach them. Aging MiG-29s could not catch them in time. The country needed fighter jets that could actually take the fight to Russia's bombers before they released their payloads. Poland and Slovakia had sent MiG-29s in 2023, which helped at the margins. But the MiG-29 was fundamentally outclassed in the environment Russia had created. Ukraine needed something else. Ukraine needed the F-16. President Zelensky had been asking for F-16 since early 2023. His lobbying campaign was relentless and for a long time publicly unrewarded. State visit after state visit, speech after speech. He appeared before the United States Congress. He flew to NATO summits. He made the same argument again and again in every forum that would have him. Without air superiority, Ukraine cannot win. Without Ukraine winning, democracy loses. And time again, his allies said the right things in public and hesitated in private. The hesitation was rooted in one word: escalation. From the very beginning of the war, NATO's support for Ukraine had followed a cautious, incremental logic. The alliance started with protective gear and anti-tank weapons. Then it graduated to long-range rockets and heavy artillery systems, then heavy tanks. Each step came with dire warnings from Moscow about catastrophic consequences. And each time, Moscow's bark turned out to be worse than its bite. But fighter jets felt different. They felt like crossing a line that tanks and missiles had not. They felt like a direct challenge to Russian airspace, a provocation that might finally trigger the escalatory spiral that Western leaders had been trying to avoid since February 2022. What ultimately shifted the calculus was simple, brutal necessity. Russia was not slowing down. It was grinding forward. Its strategy of attrition, throwing wave after wave of men and machines at Ukrainian positions, was slowly, brutally working. Ukraine could not match Russia in numbers. It never could. The only path to survival was technological superiority. And Zelensky's allies finally accepted what he had been telling them for over a year. The first F-16s landed at a secret Ukrainian airfield on August 4th, 2024, Ukraine's Air Force Day. The timing was clearly no accident. Zelensky unveiled the jets in a formal ceremony, flanked by Dutch and Danish officials, the two nations that had led the way. Norway and Belgium followed. In total, around 85 F-16s have now been promised to Ukraine. 24 from the Netherlands, 19 from Denmark, 12 from Norway, and 30 from Belgium, with Belgian deliveries scheduled to continue through 2028. The wait had been agonizing. The arrival was historic. Before we get into what the F-16 has done in combat, and the results are genuinely remarkable, we need to understand exactly why Ukraine's older jets were so outmatched. Because this is not simply a story of newer versus older. It is a story of fundamentally different generations of warfare colliding in the same sky. The MiG-29 is not a bad aircraft for its era. When it rolled out of Soviet design bureaus in the 1970s and 1980s, it was a formidable machine. But it was designed for a specific threat environment that no longer exists. And in the war Russia is fighting today, that mismatch is lethal. The radar systems aboard the MiG-29 simply cannot detect Russia's modern long-range air-to-air missiles, particularly the R-37M, a weapon with an engagement range that can reach out and destroy a MiG-29 before the pilot even knows he is being targeted. Think about what that means in practice. Ukrainian pilots were being shot at by missiles they could not see, launched from aircraft they could not detect, from distances that gave them no time to react. This forced Ukrainian pilots into an impossible tactical situation. They had to fly as low as possible, skimming treetops, using the terrain itself to hide from Russian sensors. A colonel in the Ukrainian Air Force described it with devastating simplicity. He said his pilots flew on a knife's edge every single mission. The F-16 changes almost everything about this equation. Its AN/APG-68 radar system can detect targets at ranges that leave Russia's older jets scrambling to respond. Its electronic warfare suite can jam, deceive, and disrupt enemy targeting systems. And critically, it is fully integrated with the entire ecosystem of NATO standard munitions. Every missile in the Western arsenal designed for it. Every smart bomb compatible, every targeting system plug and play. A Ukrainian pilot who described the transition put it in terms any fighter pilot would understand. He said that against Russia's jets, the fight would no longer be one-sided. It would be an equal fight. And for a man who had been flying on a knife's edge for 2 years, an equal fight feels like winning. Now let us talk about results, because this is where the story goes from impressive to genuinely historic. According to official statistics released by the Armed Forces of Ukraine in late 2025, F-16 pilots had intercepted more than 1,300 airborne targets, cruise missiles, and one-way attack drones since the jets entered service. 1,300 in roughly 15 months of operations. That is not a rounding error. That is a measurable, documented reduction in the destructive power Russia can bring to bear on Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. The individual feats recorded during this period border on the extraordinary. On December 13th, 2024, during a mass Russian aerial strike involving almost 200 drones and 94 missiles, a single Ukrainian F-16 pilot destroyed 6 Russian cruise missiles in one combat sortie. 6 in a single mission. A record for the Fighting Falcon in the jet's entire operational history across all the world's air forces. 2 of those kills were achieved using the aircraft's M61 Vulcan cannon, firing at cruise missiles traveling over 650 kilometers per hour. The pilot had never attempted that technique in real combat before that morning. He had only practiced it in a simulator. The Air Force Command stated that for the first time in the history of the Fighting Falcon, an F-16 fighter jet destroyed 6 Russian cruise missiles in one combat mission. That is history being written in Ukrainian skies. On the ground attack side, Ukrainian Air Force figures confirmed over 300 successful strikes against Russian ground targets by late 2025. Vehicles, command centers, ammunition depots, drone operator positions, Russian logistics infrastructure across the Eastern Theater. The aircraft were functioning in both roles simultaneously, defending cities from above while going after Russian military assets on the ground. What also emerged from the combat record was just how creative Ukrainian pilots had become. They developed entirely new tactics tailored to one of the most hostile air environments in the world: dispersed operations, frequent relocation between airfields, minimal infrastructure, maximum unpredictability. Ukraine did not just copy American doctrine. It ran ahead of it in real combat, under fire. This story is not only about victories, it never is. And any honest accounting of the F-16 program in Ukraine has to include what it has cost. The program has suffered real losses. 4 aircraft and 3 pilots, according to official figures released in late 2025. The most painful of these losses came in August 2024, just days after the jets arrived, when pilot Alexei Mess, known by his call sign Moonfish, was killed. According to Ukraine's Air Force Command, Mess had shot down 3 Russian cruise missiles and 1 attack drone in the moments before his aircraft went down. He was defending his country until the final second. The loss triggered political shockwaves in Kyiv as rumors circulated that the jet may have been brought down by friendly Ukrainian air defenses, a catastrophic case of fratricide in the fog of one of the most complex air battles Ukraine had ever fought. Zelensky fired the commander of the Air Force in the aftermath. The incident exposed something important and painful. Ukraine was asking pilots to operate a fundamentally alien aircraft system, one with entirely different avionics, different communication protocols, different maintenance requirements, in one of the most dangerous air environments on Earth. But step back from the immediate combat results and look at the strategic picture, and the F-16's importance becomes even clearer. Before Ukraine had Western aircraft, there was a fundamental incompatibility at the heart of its relationship with NATO's arsenal. Ukraine's Soviet-era jets could not carry Western missiles and bombs without extensive, time-consuming modifications. For some weapons, integration simply was not feasible. That compatibility gap was a major constraint. Now that Ukraine flies Western jets, that barrier is gone. NATO has decades of stockpiled munitions designed specifically for the F-16. The factories producing those munitions are still running. The supply chains are established. Russia has been betting it can outlast Ukraine through sheer mass. The F-16's integration with NATO's industrial base is one of the most powerful strategic counters to that bet. And the math of attrition is increasingly painful for Moscow. According to Forbes Ukraine, the cost of a single Russian missile and drone barrage involving over 200 projectiles was estimated at between $1.2 and $1.5 billion. Every attack that Ukraine's F-16s significantly blunt is a billion-dollar investment that failed to achieve its objective. Russia's war machine runs on resources. Those resources are finite. The F-16 story is not finished, not even close, and the direction it is heading has implications that stretch far beyond Ukraine's borders. France has announced plans to deliver Mirage 2000 fighter jets to Ukraine, with a training program covering over 4,500 Ukrainian personnel, a scale that suggests far more than a token contribution. Ukraine's defense minister has urged Britain and Germany to consider sending Eurofighter Typhoon jets. Swedish Saab Gripens have entered the conversation. What began as a transfer of aging European F-16s is evolving into the foundation of an entirely new air force, one built on Western standards, Western weapons, and Western industrial support. The Kursk incursion of August 2024, the largest attack on Russian soil since World War II, in which Ukrainian forces captured over 500 square miles of Russian territory, was enabled in part by this growing air capability. According to the Dutch Air Force, Ukraine is permitted to use its F-16s for strikes inside Russia. That authorization is not a footnote. It means the aircraft can support offensive operations across the border, strike Russian logistics and command posts, and force Russia to defend its own territory with resources that would otherwise be directed at Ukrainian cities. Meanwhile, NATO is quietly absorbing lessons from this conflict that no training exercise could ever replicate. The alliance is learning things about F-16 performance, munitions effectiveness, and real-world tactics that will shape Western air combat doctrine for a generation. Ukraine is not just fighting for its survival. It is, in a very real sense, field testing the future of Western warfare. Putin's original calculation in February 2022 rested on several assumptions: that Ukraine would collapse quickly, that NATO would fracture, that Western publics would tire before Moscow did. 3 years in, every single one of those assumptions has been proven wrong, and the F-16 program is perhaps the clearest exhibit of that proof. Somewhere over Ukraine tonight, an F-16 is flying, doing its job, keeping the lights on, A pilot is tracking a missile on radar that 2 years ago would have been invisible to him. He is flying a jet that 2 years ago his government was told it would never receive. He is executing techniques that 2 years ago existed only in simulators. That is the story of Ukraine in this war. Learning, adapting, executing under impossible pressure against impossible odds with whatever is available. The skies over Ukraine are still contested, still dangerous, still claimed by no one completely, but they are no longer what they were before August 4th, 2024. The F-16 arrived, and it changed the game. And that, right there, is why this story matters. Not just to Ukrainians, not just to NATO strategists, but to anyone who wants to understand how modern wars are actually won and lost. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in the grinding, incremental, extraordinarily costly process of adaptation, technology, and will. We covered a lot of ground today. The collapse of Ukraine's Soviet-era Air Force, the political battle to unlock the F-16, the technical revolution these jets brought to the battlefield, the real losses the program has suffered, and what the growing Western Air Coalition means for the long-term outcome of this war. Every single one of those threads is still developing, and I will be here to follow every one of them with you. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, first of all, thank you, genuinely. It means you care about understanding the world at a level deeper than a 2-minute news clip. That is exactly who this channel is built for. So if you have not subscribed yet, do it right now. It takes 2 seconds, and it means you will never miss an analysis like this one. And here is what I want from you in the comments. And please do not just say, great video. Tell me something real. Do you think the F-16 has genuinely changed the trajectory of this war, or is it too little, too late? Do you think NATO should go further? Typhoons, Gripens, deeper strikes? I want to read your actual take, because the comment section on this channel is one of the most thoughtful on YouTube, and that is entirely because of you. Share this video with one person who follows this conflict. Just one. Because the more people who understand what is actually happening in Ukraine, not the surface headlines, but the strategic depth beneath them, the better the conversations we all get to have. I am Laura Collins. This story is not over, not by a long shot, and I will be here for every chapter of it. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.